Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Welcome back to Dick Month, everyone, where I look at the works and adaptations of Philip K. Dick. Today, I'm looking at episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Season 1 of Man in the High Castle, the television show, which is an adaptation of the novel that helped popularize alternative history as a genre in the United States and further out in the Anglosphere. Just real quick, spoilers are incoming. So in the first 3 episodes, we saw the world roughly sketched out for us. We met our 3 main characters, Frank, Juliana, and Joe, and we watched them get pulled from their lives into the active machinery of oppression and resistance. For Frank, that meant being tortured and having his sister and kids murdered to try and force him to talk. Only when the Japanese find someone else that they think they're guilty of the crime, they let him go with a shrug and a, "Oops, sorry about your dead niece and nephew, kid." He doesn't take that well, but we'll get back to that. For Juliana, that was seeing her sister murdered in the street by Japanese occupation forces, leading to her abandoning her life to head into the neutral zone to find out what Trudy was looking for. And almost getting killed by not one, but 2 different Nazi agents. But there is a guy who is willing to help, and that's Joe, who is an undercover Nazi agent recruited to infiltrate and dismantle the resistance. But he's still willing to bash the marshal over the head with a bat to save Juliana. I appreciate Joe doing that, but I'm starting to get the feeling that Juliana might be a terrible judge of character. Here in episodes 4, 5, and 6, we see their reactions to their exposure to the machine of oppression. Because as they deal with the fallout of government reaction to what they've done, they realize they can't just go back to their normal lives. Frank has lost too much to just let it go and go back to work. Juliana has come too far and done too much and still has no answers as to why her sister was shot in the street without so much as a "how are you?" And Joe has too much blood on his hands and has sacrificed too much in the name of an absent father to stop now. All of them are now kind of locked in and have to keep going. Frank and Juliana are radicalized by this. Before the events of the first 3 episodes, they were, I wouldn't say happy, but content to keep their heads down and just try to get by. After the events of the first 3 episodes, they can't do that anymore. Frank wants revenge for his losses. And I can understand that because from his viewpoint, he didn't do anything. He was doing everything the Japanese asked him to do, and they still came into his home, trashed the place, dragged him kicking and screaming into a prison, tortured him, and then murdered his family. Juliana, meanwhile, might have been willing to let everything go back to normal, but her life has also been upended, and when she tries to cooperate with authorities to just make it all go away, the Japanese secret police just point blank tell her this isn't happening. Although, I have to admit, from my viewpoint, this is some serious victim blaming they're doing here. The secret policeman in question, Inspector Keto, basically tells her that everything is her fault, and that is some grade A bullshit. Keto is the one who made the decision to torture an innocent man and kill his family, not Juliana. Keto is the guy who works to grind people up and keep a boot on people's faces. Everything he does is on him. And for him to try and pass the blame off to Juliana, whose crime is trying to find out why her sister died by getting on a bus and delivering a reel of film shows some real moral cowardice to me. I've been told the inspector has a fandom, and at this point, I really don't understand why, but there are multiple seasons to this show, so I'm not going to take anybody out to the ring and fight this out over that. Meanwhile, Joe goes home and is subjected to some fairly subtle psychological manipulation by his boss, John Smith. He is told his mission was an utter failure because he disobeyed orders and had the gall to think for himself. And then John Smith, his boss, invites him over to his home for VA Day, a celebration of the conquest of America by Nazis. And this doesn't sound like a reward, but it is a reward because it's showing Joe everything he never had and always wanted. A family with a approving father figure and younger siblings who like him, and even Mrs. Smith gets on the act by giving him motherly encouragement, pointing out that this nice house with the suburban yard and the friendly neighbors is something Joe can have if he gets with the program. John Smith is an SS officer, and I hate his guts just for that. But I have to admit, the dude is a mastermind at mentally and emotionally manipulating people. And this part of the episodes was the scariest part for me to watch. These episodes also continue the plot of Trade Minister Tagomi and Wagner. Wagner is a Nazi official who came to the Pacific States to leak important information to the Japanese Empire. The handoff is meant to occur during the speech of the Crown Prince of the Japanese Empire, but he gets assassinated during his speech. Now, making it awkward, Frank actually showed up to the speech with a loaded pistol, planning to shoot the Crown Prince as revenge for his sister, his niece, and his nephew, but someone beats him to it, leaving Frank in the awkward position of standing in a crowd with a loaded pistol and a dying heir to the throne of the Japanese Empire on stage. Amazingly, he manages to escape, but now things are going from bad to worse for Frank. Wagner manages to do his handoff despite all of this, but he's identified by a Nazi officer while doing so, and while he escapes the Pacific States, he gets arrested in New York City. And how he gets arrested is kind of chilling, because John Smith shows up to the airport during VA Day to invite Wagner into his home so the arresting unit knows exactly where to find him. So throughout the entire day, John Smith plies this guy with wine and food and fond memories because they used to serve together during the war, while waiting for the Nazi cops to show up and drag him away. John Smith is terrifying. He scares me, and he should scare you, because that is ice cold. Meanwhile, Juliana tracks down more resistance members, finding one in the ruined home of a man who was tortured and killed by the Japanese secret police. That resistance member gives her information, leading to Juliana going to work for the Japanese government so she can uncover what went wrong, how Trudy was identified, leading to her murder by the Japanese. Which shows us her growing commitment to finding out what's going on, and it also shows how disgusting these systems are, because to get the job, she is extorted by the hiring manager to perform what he calls personal services, and yeah, it's exactly what you think it is. Now, this isn't something that's limited to authoritarian states. I wish it was. Well, I wish it didn't even happen there, but I'd rather it was limited to there. But this is something that happens when some people get protections and others don't, and there's no enforcement against petty tyrants abusing their power on anyone they can. When protections are dismantled, people get hurt, abused, and exploited. And that's unfortunately more topical than I would like right now. We also see there are other Jewish people still alive. When someone who knew Frank's sister tells him to come by and visit, and when Frank does, reveals himself as a hidden Jew and leads his family with Frank looking on in a prayer for his sister, niece, and nephew's souls, which helps Frank a lot more than the memorial service that his brother-in-law put on using Japanese traditions in order to curry favor with his Japanese bosses. Episode 6 ends with Juliana finding a dark answer to her questions, Frank finding some measure of release for his grief, and Joe, well, we'll talk about that in the next video. Now, in the last 2 videos, I have focused a lot on the American-born characters, but before I wrap up, I do want to circle back and spend some time on Wagner, a man with the blood of millions indirectly on his hands and a very guilty conscience. When he sits down with John Smith in his home, he repeatedly asks, all those terrible things we did, were they necessary? Were they right? Why did we even do these things to people who never hurt us and were honestly never a threat to us to start with? John Smith flat out doesn't want to discuss it. He has repressed his guilt, his doubt, and his shame, and he is doubling down on being a Nazi. But interestingly enough, he also covers up those crimes. He doesn't celebrate it. He just puts it under the rug. Didn't happen. Everything is fine. And that shows that John Smith, despite being this brutal, monstrous manipulator of a man, is also walking around knowing what he did was wrong. And his solution is to just pretend it didn't happen. Wagner, on the other hand, can't ignore the sheer vileness that he has and is currently part of. I don't have it in me to offer any forgiveness to a guy like him, but having him show doubt, remorse, and shame is the show making the point that the Nazis were not monsters wearing human faces. That would make things easy. The Nazis were human beings all the way down. They were fathers, mothers, siblings, neighbors, friends, totally human people who decided to commit and support monstrous acts. They were as human as we are, and we should not think that we are immune to those same drives and pressures, or that we cannot possibly sink to the same depths that they did. This is why it's important to resist people who tell us it's okay to abuse others, to be cruel, and consider certain other people as less than us. When someone tells you to beware the sin of empathy, tells you that compassion is evil, that asking for mercy to be shown to the weak, the poor, and downtrodden is actually monstrous, whether they're aware of this or not, they are trying to lead you down this path. And if they are aware, they will of course deny it, but this is the path they're trying to set you on, and it always ends in brutality and degradation for not just its victims, but for the people walking it. And I think we should all keep that in mind. Nothing good comes from walking this path. It is something that should always be resisted. I keep ending these videos on somber notes, but I am talking about a show where Nazis occupy over half the United States. So maybe that's just unavoidable. Anyways, I hope you found this video informative or thought-provoking, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or even consider subscribing. All of those help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on future subjects, consider joining the Patreon for $1 a month. There's a link in the description below. You can also buy me a coffee. There's also a link there. And if you make a one-time donation on the coffee and you have a request, I will put it on my list and get to it. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thanks to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. I hope these videos aren't bumming you out, man. Next week, I'll be back with a look at the last 4 episodes to wrap up Dick Month. I hope you'll join me, but until then, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.